This is Dr. Tami Dean, and you are listening to the Equity Hour podcast. I am so excited to be here with you today. My goal is that as a listener, you leave with new ideas, resources, and actionable steps for your educational community. Let's explore how we can use our voices for equity and social justice today. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Equity Hour with your host, Dr. Tami. And my guest this week is LeTerrian Officer-McIntosh. I am so excited to have LT with us. LT is a graduate of the University of Southern California's School of Cinematic Arts, where she earned her BA in film and television production and holds an MS in education from Johns Hopkins University. She has worked on several major Hollywood productions, wait for this, y'all, including Marvel's Black Panther, HBO's True Detective. Okay, that's one of my personal faves, just so you know. Showtime's Kidding, Season 2, and Promising Young Woman. She is the founder of Outlast Arts and Education, a 501c3 organization that celebrates, empowers, and helps advance Native youth in South Dakota through media arts education and community building. Through this work and beyond, LT frequently collaborates with BIPOC youth to create meaningful pathways towards self-determination, economic freedom, and creative expression. Look, girl, you're doing all the things. When she's not working, she's a woman after my own heart. She loves to travel and spend time with her 2 dogs and a cat. Y'all know I have 3 cats. And travel is the game. So welcome to the show, LT.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Yes. Woo, woo. Okay. So I'm sure people heard to me, the juxtaposition of Black Panther and South Dakota. And they're like, what is happening? So I can't wait for you to tell the story of how that happens. I do want to start, and maybe this will help us get to how you ended up in both of those different spaces that may seem different, but probably aren't as different as we think. But as you know, I like each of my guests to talk about their equity journey, how you kind of got into this work. I'm just going to turn it over to you. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, I guess to really answer that question, I have to take it way back. So growing up, I lived between my grandparents' home in a very upper middle class area with my mother, who would have been considered living in a low income area. And I can talk about later, I don't like that term, but going to school in both locations kind of just opened up a whole new understanding, particularly around the fact that I wasn't getting the same education in both places.
Yeah.
And so when I would be with my mother and going to school, I just remember, classroom would be overcrowded. There'd be times where we may not all have a seat, or, the other seats that were available were broken down. We didn't have enough textbooks, so we're partnered up. And the teachers were obviously overwhelmed. There's 32 of us in this room. We're all dealing with the various set of different life circumstances that probably, really impacted just what we were able to accomplish in school, because we had all these things going on.
Yeah,
then
absolutely.
My grandparents, and they had orchestra and band, and they had restaurants within the cafeteria, and, everyone's parents are picking them up in these nice cars, and we've got all these clubs and opportunities. And I was like, no, wait a minute.
One of these things is not like the other.
And the other, with my grandparents, it wasn't private school. It was just school.
Yeah.
And my mom, it was just school. And so around 6th grade, and that's when I started going to school over at my grandparents' house, is when I realized that there was a major difference. And the difference when you're a child, you don't understand all of the big historical things and all the factors. I said, this is the Black school. And over here, where all the kids look like me, we're not actually learning very, very much. And the lunch is actually not very good. Teachers are overwhelmed, and we don't have books. And over here, I have the time of my life in the sense of all the resources are there. But then I also felt like I didn't belong, right?
Oh,
that
yeah.
I'm supposed to be in this space. And so I didn't know how to make very much meaning out of that at the time. In that, again, like I didn't understand all the context. I just knew as a child, I said, well, then I need to be over here at the white school, right? Because that's the school that will give me the opportunities. I knew I wanted to go to college. I didn't know what for, but I said, it seems like the only way I'm going to get to where I want to be in life is this proximity to these white kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
I spent a lot of time. I remember when I moved back to my mom's house and I went to a school in the neighborhood, and it was my freshman year of high school. I was like, absolutely not. I need to find another school. I called the district and I Googled something online and I said, I have a right to a good education. That's what I told her. I didn't know what that meant or exactly what I'm advocating
I love
for.
this. You're like, I'm not even sure what I'm saying,
Online,
but I
and
know.
it said, we all have a right to education. I said, and I'm not getting the one that I'm supposed to get over here. And so I kept calling, and I hounded them and they said, okay, we'll put you in this busing program and, or not a busing program. They said they had some program where, if your school that you were assigned to was failing or below a certain level, you could go to another school.
Like a school of choice or something like that?
Yeah, like you can pick, they had like a few options and you could pick one, but you had to get yourself there. So I was we were in Atlanta at the time, and I'd have to take the MARTA from where we were, and it took about 2.5 hours to get to school every day. And then at some point, we moved again, and I ended up at this school, and they had this program called the IB program. I had no idea what it meant, but it registered to me that this was an advanced program. And so I showed up in the IB office and I said, I'm supposed to be in this program, so you need to enroll me. But I didn't have any test scores. It hadn't transferred over yet. And they're like, oh, I don't know if you're supposed to. And I'm like, no, I'm supposed to be in this program. You need to put me in IB. They had me take this test and they said, okay, you can be in IB. And through that, I always thought I was smart, but I knew I was not taking anybody's AP or IB chemistry. Okay. I didn't know that.
Me either, girl. Me either.
I
no biology, no chemistry.
Right. They put me in IB bio. I had to say one of them. That was a journey. We got through it. But I ended up, and it ties back into Black Panther and all those other things. I was avoiding IB chemistry when I was picking my class schedule, and there was this option for IB film. And so I said, okay, put me in IB film. And I remember the first day in class, I honestly thought we were going to be watching movies, okay? Just watching movies. And I was like, it's going to be an easy A. I remember I walked in, I dropped my bag on the floor, I sat back. And the IB film teacher, who was also the IB English teacher, Mr. Aronson, was like, what are you doing? And I'm like, waiting for the movie to start. I'm like a teenager, I waited for the movie to start.
Duh.
And it was like, your notebook and your pen out now. And I was like, oh, okay. And so the class was really like a deep dive into like cinema as literature, as an art form, understanding the themes and the nuances and just breaking down this film language. And then my whole world just changed. That is what ended up leading me to pursuing a career in film. But that whole journey, which was all necessary to bring me to that moment of even advocating for myself to be put into the program, is kind of what set that pathway towards film, and then brought me back to education. Because once I started at USC, I was really thinking about media and the way it impacts how. At the time, I was really focused on how it impacts how people view Black. Just having that experience of being the only, I remember when I was with my grandparents, my sister and I were the only 2 Black kids in the school. Up until that moment, I had never experienced racism, right? And it took me a little bit to get it. I remember I had a classmate ask me, is your dad in jail? And I was confused. I was like, oh no, is your dad in jail? Because I didn't know what reading. And I was like, no, girl, you okay?
Like, do a lot of people in this school have
are y'all good over here? And I went home to my grandpa and I was like, Grandpa, why did she ask me if my daddy was in jail? And he was like, oh, let's have that talk. And then I started noticing just the ways I was treated differently. And then later on, when I started studying film, I started recognizing the way media was putting out these very specific narratives about the community. Like I remember watching The Help with my grandmother. And I remember I was feeling uncomfortable, right? In the sense of like, that just didn't reflect the reality that I was living when I was with my grandparents, right? Like my grandfather worked for the government, a really good job for a long time. My grandmother was the head nurse in the neonatal unit, like all of these things. In a lot of ways, very cookie cutter. There was a dog and a big yard, and someone read to me every night, and I wasn't allowed to go outside and play until, I read X amount of pages and wrote about it. And that's how a lot of my family operated. When you looked on TV, you couldn't find that, right? When I watched, you would think that we were just relegated to this very specific experience. And not saying that any other experience that didn't match that was not valid. It absolutely was. But it just didn't make sense to me that those were the only experiences,
the diversity of, the experience was missing from the story. Yeah. And the narrative and what people could see or have like a window into. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I felt like that just had such an impact on just how people reacted to me and honestly how I reacted to myself sometimes. I just felt like an alien. I struggled with some just internalized hatred of just not ever feeling like enough, navigating these spaces. And so when I got to USC, I was just really, really looking at media and wanting to create, in my storytelling and my own journey as a filmmaker and a creative, wanting to tell stories that broadened the perspective and and the view of what it meant to exist in this wonderful community that I come from. And so I don't know if I should pause there because then that'll take me next into
let's pause for a second because I have, of course, a couple questions because a few things you said. Number one, I am just so impressed with the amount of self-advocacy you were able to exercise as a young person that put you on the path to where you are today. So kudos to you, right? For advocating for yourself in that way. Is that something that you felt was just like an inherently part of your person? Do you think that was modeled from other adults around you? Or where did that like tenacity to say, no, I'm supposed to be here and you need to open a spot for me?
I felt like, I think some of a significant portion of that came from seeing how difficult experiences my mom can go through sometimes of just, being a single mother, raising myself and my sister. And I knew that I wanted life to look different. Mm-hmm. I knew that there would be these roadblocks, and I kind of learned or picked up or kind of rationalized that if I knew that I wanted life to ultimately be easier at some point, that I have to go around the roadblocks, and that whatever that roadblock was, whether I interpret it as people or, this district that I was in, I just had to go around them or through them or whatever. And then also with my grandparents, they just from a young age, success wasn't a maybe. Like in the way they spoke, it wasn't. I remember my granddad is a musician. He plays saxophone and clarinet and all these things. And so when fifth grade came, he goes, "What instrument are you going to play?" Yeah. Not if you're going to play an instrument. And so it never even occurred to me as like there was an option to not try to acquire this new skill. It was, what skill are you going to acquire? And so I think that's, kind of really set it. And then they would ask me things like, well, what college are you going to go to? Yeah. No, and it could have been community college, but you were going to do something, Yeah. And then I think, school, I went to a lot of schools that I really felt were failing me. And I've always had a very strong sense of like justice. And once I figured out that this wasn't fair, I said, well, because it's not fair, that, told me that I'm going to have to work beyond that and move beyond that. And, the systems, and when you're a kid, you're saying these people are not fair, but, it's broader than that. It's much larger than that. But at the time, I'm like, y'all are not fair. Therefore, I'm not even taking what you're telling me. I'm not realizing it because you don't know what you're talking about. So I'm going to go figure it out. So I think it's a combination of things. I'm also the oldest daughter. I feel like that's got to have something to do
Oh,
with
it definitely. I'm an oldest daughter, so 100%.
And I was actually thinking about the other day, when did that set in? And I would have to say around sixth grade when I started realizing that schools could be different. And there was no reason because I got to this other school that was more resource and things like that. And I didn't choose to go there. I was, moved to my grandparents' house. Therefore, I said, if I didn't do anything to not be here, then there's no reason that I shouldn't be here in these spaces.
Yeah.
And that just kind of stuck with me. The world should be available to me. And that was a driving force to get me through school.
Yeah. Oh, that's so amazing. I've heard a couple themes that I think in the things you're sharing that are really important. One, of course, is like representation matters and is important. And I've been, we've seen a lot more of that probably in the last decade of trying to make sure that that happens and that diversity of story that's been historically missing. And also the the power of how we use words and speak truth or possibility into young people. And whether that is your child, your grandchild, you're a teacher, whomever you are, like your words are powerful to set the tone for what they may see as possible. I mean, I have heard so many stories of people talking about my teacher told me I was a failure or I was never going to make anything in my life or whatever, things like that, right? And that is detrimental to the psyche of a young person. So I don't know where I was going to go with that, but I just think those two pieces are huge. Like they work really well in tandem. So not only are we hearing and saying that these things are possible, diverse persons get to see it and the potential of it, whether that's through fictionalized story or truth in who's sitting and doing what and having a voice in what's happening in the world. I don't know. What do you think about that take on what you've said?
Well, you hear all the time like teachers saying, you're not going to make it, or these comments that really sit with a young person. And it kind of takes me back. I was towards the end of my time at USC and I had 3 jobs. I was taking 18 credits. Like
girl,
was out trying to pay for life in California. And
yes.
And I remember I had this, like, one of the final projects and I made a mistake in coverage. And so I broke this rule to where when you flip the camera, if you don't do it the right way, it changes where the character is on screen and it's a continuity error. And I was just mortified. I was just so down on myself. And I was already really sitting with these thoughts of you're never going to be good enough. You're not going to make it. And one of my professors told me that I wasn't going to make it, that I should really maybe start considering something else. And, it really hurt my feelings. I was embarrassed in front of my peers and everything. Yeah. But again, I was like, you know what, that's a roadblock. And what do we do with roadblocks? And so I ended up emailing that semester probably 200 cinematographers. And I just asked them all to please meet me for coffee. I just wanted to talk and learn about what I needed to do to get in the industry, make an industry. And I met a man named Salvatore Totino, who I absolutely adore, for coffee. And I said, what advice do you have for a young person who really wants to get in a camera? So we talked. And a couple of weeks later, he called and he was like, I really like you. I really think that, you can do this. Do you want to come work on Spider-Man Homecoming? Right. So I say this because it's such a juxtaposition.
Yeah.
I have one figure who's like, just throw in the towel. And this other one who is like, you're still green, you're still learning. Come on, I'll teach you. I'll help you. Mm-hmm. And I got that job on Spider-Man. I emailed that professor and I said, hey, remember when you told me that I should just go ahead and hang it up? In 2 weeks, I start my first job on Spider-Man Homecoming.
Mic drop. Okay.
And I say that because that was such a pivotal moment for me because that was before I got into education. But Sal's reaction to me and support of me completely reconfigured my brain on what is possible when you support young people, right? Young people are going to make mistakes. They're new. They're learning. They're acquiring this skill and this knowledge. So even if the mistake is made, something happens, you don't tell them that they're never going to be anything. I wasn't even 21. I might have been just 21. My brain never needed done.
Look, yes.
Our approach. We're going to learn this stuff together, right? And so that moment where, even though, despite my best effort, I didn't hit this standard, there was still someone who said, I see you, I see your passion, I see how much you love this. Come on, you're with me. And that is, just how I approach working with young people. I tell them, look, this might be hard. It might challenge you. It might frustrate you. You might not get it right, but you're not by yourself.
Quick pause. I've got something powerful coming up that I want you to know about. This summer, I'm hosting 2 free webinar series designed to support you wherever you serve in education. For classroom educators and instructional coaches, I'm launching Equity at the Core, Practical Strategies for Everyday Teaching, a 3-part series starting June 19th that gives you tools to plan, connect, and respond with equity from day one. And for school and district leaders, there's Leading for Equity, Systems that Serve All Students, another 3-part series built specifically for those shaping policy, culture, and systems. That series kicks off June 23rd. All are free 45-minute sessions and are designed to be practical, powerful, and immediately useful. You can register right now for all of them, one of them, whatever fits in your schedule by clicking the link in the show notes, visiting dragonflyrising.org, or heading over to Instagram and scanning the QR code. Let's keep growing together. I'd love to see your name on the list.
Yeah.
There's someone here. And I don't even know if I answered the question because I've gone off on a tangent.
Look, I don't know. You did. But you know what? I was feeling that so much. I had a high school English teacher. I was in honors English. And I was not the best speller. And this was before, okay, I'm going to date myself. We had to write our essays by hand with pen, skipping every line. Like we didn't always type them. Okay. That's how old I am.
We had to.
So she was like, I just remember that she was like, do you even read? Oh, your spelling is atrocious. Okay, mind you, I'm a prolific reader. So let me tell you, when I got my doctorate in literacy, learning, and instruction, I was like, where you at? Where you at, Mrs. Morgan? Where you at? Like, I was like, oh, I feel you so much. But you did. But yes, you did answer the question. Oh my God, I just lost my train of thought. But what I think is also key there, I remember what it was. This idea of perfection. One part of my career, I was a teacher educator, so I was preparing future teachers or working with practicing teachers. And one of the things that I always want people to be mindful of is sometimes as educators, we are asking our students or children or youth to do things that we don't, even do as adults, right? And the collective humanity of the learners around you, right? There is no such thing as a perfect person or perfect execution of anything. So where is the space for the learning to take place? That is actually why you're there. And hello, mistakes. The mistakes are what lead to new learning and understanding and developing, right? Like anybody, and I will go to my grave saying this, anybody can regurgitate and make it seem like they know something, like on a multiple choice test or something like that. Like you're not actually assessing knowledge. You're assessing memorization. But when you're like creating a film, when you're making or developing something, we're meant to be creative as humans. And so tapping into that creative piece and sharing a little part of our person with the world and the universe is what we're supposed to do. Like that's why podcasting, I love it. It's storytelling. Like we've historically connected as humans around story and narrative and passed them down. This is just another type of story in our current day and age. And so I think I want to like, take that to film, right? Because that's like the ultimate
Yeah.
story. Because I know you kind of ended like, okay, this is where Spider-Man Homecoming, this is where you got into film. And I know that connected you to the work you're doing with the youth, which I want to make sure we do get to talk about too, because that is so just so empowering and heartwarming.
So I have to backtrack them a little bit.
Okay.
Man. So I'm into media literacy, just really curious about it, how media impacts our worldviews.
Yeah.
At the time, in my junior year at USC, I was working at the on-campus gym, one of my 3 jobs. 5 a.m., I'm the opener. There's not too many people at the gym at 5 in the morning. We're on a college campus.
I was like, not in college, right? What? You're like, I get to study.
Right. I would watch these TED Talks. I would just put them on randomly, and they just kind of helped me stay awake because at that point in my life, I was definitely not sleeping very much. Mm-hmm. And so I would hit play, and then the next one would come on, the next one would come on. And so this TED Talk came on again. I wasn't looking for it. And it was about Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. And up until this moment, I had never, ever, ever heard of Pine Ridge. I'd never thought about South Dakota. Well, when you first think about South Dakota, I feel like a lot of people go, there's no Black people in South Dakota, So, it just wasn't on my radar. And so this TED Talk came on, and it was done by a man who was not from South Dakota, who was not from the reservation, who was not Native. Mm-hmm. And he was the core of the presentation was everyone here is poor, they're sad, they're unhappy, they neglect their children, everyone's on drugs, and everyone just drinks a bunch of alcohol. And I watched this whole presentation, and I was just disgusted.
Yeah. I was sitting here like,
I know. And I'm sitting there like, and it's like my mind was just blown right open because, immediately I was like, you can't go into somebody else's community and do your best to highlight all these negative things that you can find. But then I'm like, I know there are plenty of people in the community who are working hard to right wrongs that they didn't even cause, right? This is colonization. This is centuries of
they were placed in this space.
Literally, right? Just that lack of nuance. And so I was sitting there and I was like, oh, this is happening to other communities too. And I thought about, just my journey and just being a kid and watching these films where Black people are just portrayed as drug dealers, broken homes, lack of community, just not showing any resilience or anything. And I was like, oh, this is happening to other communities as well.
Yeah.
And I started thinking, or on that same day, I watched this TED Talk. And this is how I was only 22. I was like, we should start a film camp. You know what? Start a film camp, and we should teach the kids how to make their own films. And then they'll tell their own stories. Boom. Yeah. Does not exactly happen that way. But I text a good friend of mine, fellow film student, Nix, and I text him and I said, hey, do you want to go to Pine Ridge Reservation with me in South Dakota and start a film camp for kids? And they text back and it literally just said, sure, period. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, we're really doing this. And so we gathered a couple other friends and we had a meeting. And we were like, we should just make an Indiegogo and just see how much money we could raise to go to South Dakota. And have first of all, none of us had ever run a kids camp. None of us had taught and any volunteered and you had to do a volunteer out in school. And none of us had ever been to South Dakota. We made this Indiegogo and we're like, we're USC film students and we're going to go teach film. Then I got on Facebook and I typed in Pine Ridge Reservation. And a Boys and Girls Club came up and I emailed them and I said, hey, me and my friends from USC, want to, if y'all would like to partner, we could do a film camp for the kids. And somebody from the Boys and Girls Club wrote back and was like, sure, do you want to visit? And I was like, yeah, I'll hop on a plane and just go to South Dakota and stay with people, So I got on a plane. I went to South Dakota for the first time, hung out with the family. They showed me around. I was like, great, we're going to do a film camp here. So I came back and I told my friend, we raised $7,000 through Indiegogo, packed in a van of little juice boxes, not even in cardboard. They were just in little baggies, okay? Because we were emailing people can you donate some juice boxes, or and snacks and like pancake mix because all of that. And we packed up this little SUV and drove from Los Angeles to South Dakota. And we ran this film camp. And it was really the idea. There were a couple of things. As I got in the process and like figuring out, first of all, why, I was really pulled to do this. I was like, I did not stumble upon this TED Talk for no reason.
Yeah.
I really think there's supposed to be greater collaborations between Black and Indigenous communities. I really think if we go pour into young people and essentially just teach them these skills, our whole thing has always been, we're never going to tell you what story to tell, right?
Yeah.
But what I have, acquired is this technical knowledge and the storytelling knowledge through going to this university, which I will say is extremely inaccessible, right?
Yeah.
$60,000 a year in tuition, right? I couldn't afford to be there, which is why I had 3 jobs. There was no support.
Right, and it just keeps getting worse.
It's getting worse. The school wasn't paying for our films. And so you are a passionate storyteller, a passionate filmmaker, that access to that knowledge and that equipment is not going to be available to you. So our idea was, well, we're going to the best film school in the world. What if we just take all the knowledge that we've learned and just give it away to the kids for free? And so we did that camp for the first week with Native youth from Pine Ridge Reservation. And I'll be honest, I wasn't thinking long term. I had literally no plans to do anything besides outside of that.
You're like, I need to do this. Let's do it. Let's go. Yes.
And because at that time I was like, I'm going to be the first Black woman to win an Oscar in cinematography. That's it. Like, that is and I was like, that is my goal, which is why I was like, I got to get on somebody's big film set and learn all this stuff.
Yeah.
And at the end of that first camp, when I tell you, we were tired. So part of the camp was we picked them all up because we wanted to get rid of all barriers to success.
Mm-hmm.
So the reservation is the size of Connecticut. Now, I don't think I internalized what that meant when I made this offer, but I said, all you have to do is want to come. We'll pick you up. We had 1 SUV. So I'm doing loops, okay, for hours every morning and every day after camp to make sure all the kids could get there, and then we're teaching these film lessons.
Like, Connecticut doesn't sound that big, so you got to drive it.
Right? And we're teaching these film lessons, but we're also trying to figure out how we're going to feed all the kids. So one of us will go make lunch for everybody, and none of us could cook. It was really the children are so graceful. They are so graceful because none of us could cook, but they were everyone was just happy to be there together. And then we didn't plan out the week right. We ran out of stuff to teach, and we're like, y'all want to go get ice cream? So you see us and just a bunch of little kids following us up this a long street to get to the gas station so we can go get ice cream. It was ridiculous and fun. But at the end of the week, everyone's just really tired, all the adults. I was like, we'd screen their final film, and actually some really cool films came out of this. One group made a documentary with just Native youth from the skate park, and they were just talking about their experience and the resources they wish they had, and they were talking about being in the state park. This is what we have, and so we make we come here, we kick it, and we skate, and it just keeps us from doing other things that teens could get into. Because if you don't give teens anything to do,
they find stuff to do.
It's so they're going to go outside and do stuff, and they recognize that we want to be here at the skate park. It's what we can do. So anyway, one of the groups made a film about that. I had the littles. I've always been I just love littles. I had the 8-year-olds, and they made a little documentary about what friendship means to them. And so we screened their films. And at the end of it, my team, we were getting ready to head back to LA. And I go, okay, does anyone have anything they want to say before we go back to LA? We've had so much fun with y'all. We're so excited. And this little girl, Malik, who has now graduated high school and is off into college, she goes, Miss Terry, which is what they called me at the time, I'm really sad I'm never going to see you again. And I was like, oh no, this is something,
Yeah.
And I stepped out, and I was really moved, and I was crying. And I was like, get it together, LT. And I went back in. I'm like, what are you talking about? We'll be back next summer. And all my friends we will be where?
What did she just say when I think she's
right did. And that is how Outlast Arts and Education, formerly Outlast Film Camp, was born. It was a kind of a not very well conceived one-time project because I didn't understand at the time the responsibility we have to community. You don't just show up and do this thing with these kids and you make these films and you talk to them about, their story and then never come back.
Yeah.
Right? You don't plant that seed and not water it. And
Yeah.
so from that moment, I knew that I would always be back. I told him that I'd always be back and we'd keep making films together. Then I felt just really in awe and like very fortunate that like this is something that I get to do. And so that was in 2015 and here we are.
Wow. 10 years later from a random TED Talk.
Yeah.
I mean, well, I'm going to say random, but I don't believe the universe is random, which is sort of what you alluded to. And I think one of the really important things is the power of community, right? And investing in communities and the longevity of any of this kind of work and honoring, people's story and lived life and their opportunities within this life requires time and effort. And one thing I hope people take away from this, sometimes you have a passion or idea and everybody else is going to think you're crazy.
I'm crazy. Okay.
Yeah. But, right. I don't know about you. Well, I mean, clearly this is one example. Like it turned out for the best. Like I've done some things where people are like, girl, you're going to do what? And I was like, yep, that's what I'm doing. And then amazing. Like no regrets. And I think that's one of the things maybe modern society has pushed out of us is the ability to trust our inner passion or calling or like this knowledge that this is what I need to do and taking the risk on yourself and the trust in yourself to go execute it or try it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And see what happens.
And it kind of about we can all do something, right? There is a place for all of us to participate in this kind of work. Not everyone has to go start a whole program. I tell people sometimes, I know I feel like a lot of times we get caught up in like the problem is so big.
Yeah.
What do we do? And sometimes, just talking to people, I go, do you go to school board meetings?
Interested in learning more about equity coaching for you or your educators? Sign up for a free connection call with me, Dr. Tami, to discuss a personalized plan. The link is in the show notes.
You can start right there. You don't necessarily have to have an answer. I don't have an answer. I respond what's in front of me. I do what I can. I know what I'm good at, right? I'm good at youth programming, right? So I do that. I don't go try to organize all these other things because I might not be very helpful there, but I do what I do. And so I tell people, just do something. Show up at your local school board meeting so that people know that there's people watching, that people care. Huge thing, just that presence. And so, we can literally all do something. And it does not have to be the same thing that the next person does. We all have our strengths. And I think if we really lean into the things that we're good at, big and small, I think that's where that difference is made. And for me, I remember at one point in my life when I was young, I'm like, I want to be the next Secretary of Education. I'm going to redo the whole, you know what I mean?
Yes.
But the community like that we've been able to build with Outlast, and I mean, it's such a beautiful community. We partner and work with so many organizations on the res, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, even trying to make the program work, it's an expensive program. We're doing a pop-up film school in rural South Dakota. That it's not like we're just hopping over, next street over. So how do we make this work? Well, it's because we have the support of the local community, right?
Yeah.
So like one of our students' moms, she caters the lunches, right? Like that's such a huge thing. We have our camp when she, which means grandmother, she comes and she works with the students and just like learning about Lakota culture and history and telling those stories and pouring into them. And like, it's a whole community of people bringing the strength that we have. And that's what makes it work. It's not just myself and my fellow filmmaker friend. In the sense of like we really lean into like it takes a village, right? There's so many people all bringing their strengths and their skills and their ideas and their resources. And that's why the program has been able to grow. That's why our students have now MTV commercials, right? Independent films. We've traveled with young people from New York to Los Angeles to Chicago. Now we're implementing intergenerational wellness groups. That's not like a few people who had an idea. That's an entire community,
Yeah.
both locally and beyond that, coming together and saying, here's what we got. Now let's do something with it to support the young people. And so I truly believe that when it comes to work, there really is a place for everyone to get involved.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I tend to say all the time, like, how are you using your voice today? Right. And your voice can look a lot of different ways. It can be like actually using your voice. Your voice could be your vote and making sure you're voting in all elections, not just the quote unquote big elections. Right. You mentioned like going to your school board meeting. Like, there are so many ways. Or I'm sure people can financially support your nonprofit if they would like to, right? Yes?
Absolutely.
Okay. We'll make sure we put that link in the show notes, friends, so you can help support all of this amazing work. But there's like a voice can look so many different ways, right? And I 100% agree. There is this misconception that this work, you have to be doing something big. I really think that change happens in the small moments, in the everyday, in the conversation you choose to have, right? To speak up. If you're seeing or hearing someone only telling one version of a community and you know that that's not right or don't agree with it, like, open a conversation, right? Not to be combative. It's to have a conversation to build a new or different or changed or, sort of metamorphosis of understanding.
Yeah.
As, sometimes we just don't know what we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And not every, I'm going to say this, like, not every ignorance is malicious.
Yeah, of course.
So how are we helping each other as just a community of humans?
And that also like brings me to this idea that I've just been reflecting on the last year, especially. Community is messy, right?
Yeah,
like, and I was thinking, because coming up and as a young leader, there's a lot of mistakes that I made. I didn't know what I was doing, like,
oh yeah,
learn, especially like when you're working within another community and supporting each from another community, you have to learn these cultural nuances and things like that. And so I was thinking not too long ago, just like, community is not built just in those moments where it's like, oh my God, I love all of you. We're having so much fun. Look at this like cute film. It's when I'm really annoyed with you right now. Or like hurt my feelings or I hurt your feelings. The community is really built when we draw each other back in and say, how are we going to get through this?
Mm-hmm.
We'll talk about this. There's clearly a miscommunication or harm was done or something misguided or we just don't know, right? Because it's not malicious. Community is built when we said, okay, but we're going to figure it out. We're going to together. We're going to reflect on this. And I think a lot of times that can get lost because that's the not fun part. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh,
it's fun, but that's where community is built. I try to hang on to that, right? Especially like, leading an organization and you're constantly working with and meeting with new people. If my goal is to really help create this world where youth can thrive and self-determine and build lives for themselves and their communities that they want, then that means I have to do it myself, right? So every time I get mad at somebody or something doesn't go my way, you can't just go kicking people out of community. No
cancel culture for you. No.
I think accountability needs to be there, but to build this better world, we've got to be committed to remaining in community.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if we think about community like any relationship, really, the strength of the community, the strength of the relationship happens in the vulnerability, right?
Absolutely.
With each other. And that means right? Sometimes I get it wrong. And even if I'm the leader, I'm admitting, you know what, I got that really wrong. Because that's being vulnerable. But that's where the strength comes in, because now I say this too, like when I share my vulnerability or share part of my story, I'm not just sharing my story. I'm, hoping and sharing with the idea that people will start to feel comfortable to share their story, right? Because they need that safe space. If you're never sharing, and like kind of like this idea about the res, if you guys would have gone in to become voyeurs in the reservation, like people have done for hundreds of years, right? The results wouldn't have happened in the way that they did for you. But those results happened because you were vulnerable, you were open, you were partnering, you were collaborating. All of those things build this amazing community that you have now.
Absolutely. And just working with young people, that vulnerability, I honestly think it just changes the whole experience, because now we're actually able to like learn from one another. And just like an example, eventually I did leave film and I was still working on Outlast and going Outlast. So I went into education officially, and then I started teaching. Eventually I started teaching on a reservation next door to the one our program exists. And just my classroom functions so differently than like all the other classrooms in the building. Because like if you walked in that room, you would not be able to tell that I actually wasn't related to all these kids, because like I spoke to them like that. I was their auntie. They spoke to me like that. And I remember like there's a couple times, like one day I was having a bad day. I didn't sleep the night before. I'd been sick, and I came in. I was like, yo, Miss LT is not having a good day. Like I need some grace from y'all. And I guess I'd been a little cranky that day. I remember the end of the day, and we always, we did the cha-cha slide at the end of every day. Like we love to dance, and like we kind of play at the end of the day. But like I let them play, and I just like wasn't in the mood. I was like sitting at the front of the room, and I was kind of like sitting with my hand on my cheek, and this little girl comes up and she takes this marker and she's drawing on the whiteboard, and the whole class starts snickering. And I'm just like, what in the world? I look back, and it's like an arrow, and it just says cranky Miss LT. And I just like, and that was one of the many moments that just illuminated how comfortable we are with each other, right? This idea that I was this figure who came in to just boss them around and not actually like see them. I played every day at recess. I was racing the kids and I was beating the kids. Okay, like,
yeah.
So but here's the thing. So I wasn't a particularly strict teacher, because I didn't need to be, in the sense of like we had a lot of conversations. How do we want this classroom to feel, right? What are the things we want to achieve, and really built in this idea that they could do hard things and I'd be there to support them. But I didn't follow the curriculum because I didn't like it. I didn't feel like it was culturally responsive. Actually, that was pretty racist. So like, I just wouldn't do it. I just wouldn't read the books. And
we are kindred spirits.
What? And I would like come with all these like crazy projects. And like, for example, I was like, after we got to a certain point, I was like, I'm going to teach them how to write an essay, like a proper, like a normal essay with like headings and indentation. And like, I started them on like citing and like in a very third grade way and things like that. And then they had to turn that essay into a PowerPoint, and that PowerPoint into like an oral presentation. And a lot of my colleagues were like, what are you doing? They can't do that. You just need to get like test taking skills, things like that. And if you approach with the deficit mindset, yeah, they can't, because you're not going to help them. And if you don't believe in them, like they're looking to you to kind of get an idea of what can I do,
Absolutely.
And if I go, okay, y'all, we're writing an essay today, they don't know that that's not in the curriculum. We write an essay today. No?
Yes.
When I had this group of kids who everyone thought they were not going to get anywhere near third grade level. They weren't going to pass the state tests, all of these things. And then I come in and they're like, you're definitely not helping because you're just completely off the rails here.
Oh my God, you're teaching them critical thinking and actual life skills. That's so wild. So wild.
It's really leaning like the curiosity of it all.
Yes.
Right? Like, we did puzzles and I let them pick their books and we talked about like world history and like how, and I would ask them, how did we all end up here in this space today? Because if they're little, they're like, are you not Lakota? And I'm like, I'm not. Let's talk about it. Things like, good. And I think a lot of that approach with one, I wasn't afraid to like just really meet them where they were as children, right? Like, I didn't expect them, because it's such a colonial way to look at them. Sit down, be quiet, walk in a straight line. That's not what education is. Education is about curiosity. I want to help them learn how to think for themselves. What interests you and what can you do with that? So, I mean, my classroom was puzzles and games and things like that. And what ended up happening was my students scored the highest in the district.
Of course they did. I could have told. I knew that when you started.
I offered. I said, "Do y'all want to know what I'm doing in this room?" No, I got penalized because I didn't follow the script. I didn't follow.
Oh my gosh!
I don't even know how I got here. I'm so sorry. But going back.
Oh, do not apologize. Like, I'm just like, oh my God, we're kindred spirits. Like, this is like same story, different location, different kid, but exactly that. Like, this is what you're supposed to be doing, test prep, not da, da, da. Oh, okay. Okay. So now all my students are in grade level. Some of them, this is 6th grade. Some of them came in at 2nd grade. So what were you all were okay saying they're not going to do this. And I'm like, they are totally capable. What are y'all doing?
Absolutely capable.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I got a whole story. I think I've probably talked about it on one of my podcasts. I got a whole story about this whole situation. But I love the advocacy, right? Also for the kids. Like, oh, and I know it's scary for educators to try to do things outside the box. It just scares me. It's not even outside the box. It's what school should be. Because I'm like, learning is about what you said. Exactly. Learning is about curiosity. And it seems that we've made school the place where we drive curiosity and critical thinking out of kids.
Yeah.
Especially certain types of kids.
Absolutely. I taught in Memphis too. And I thought they were going to fire me because they told me I couldn't teach Black students from Memphis, Martin in the Mountaintop, because it wasn't on the test. There's no reason I'm in this room and these kids don't know who Rosa Parks or Martin Luther. And this is 3rd grade. That's what how they not know any of this. And I said, okay, we're going to learn about this. And like, they would come in my classroom to make sure I wasn't teaching it. I just taught it anyway. You had to fire me. We went over the Memphis sanitation work.
You're making some good trouble.
You know what?
I'm here for it.
Not afraid, like, because and parents know, right? Like, we have a program on Rosebud coming up this summer, and a lot of my former students are gonna come to the program. And when I told their parents I'd be back, they're like, "Yes, go let Miss LT's program," because it is a space where students will learn in the sense that they will get to explore. They will be curious, challenged in a healthy and supportive way. And that is what education is supposed to be.
Absolutely.
So the fact that we even have to fight with people to do these things, that blows my mind more than
mine too. Every day. Every day.
I'm not going to come into this classroom. And here's the thing. I understand that I have a privilege in the sense of navigating that, and that I don't have kids, right? In the sense of like, so if someone does fire me, I'm not also responsible to, my child when I get home and it's like, your mama done lost her job because she was in there cutting up. And so I was talking to a few people not long ago, and it was like, not everyone can do that. Of course, but I can. And that's what I mean by that's what I can do.
Yeah.
Right? And so it doesn't need to look the same. And that's why I think that community support is so important, because there'll be people who I might have to go ahead and risk losing that job, right? So if that happens, can I count on somebody to bring me a meal?
Yes.
I just think these conversations are so important so that we can all figure out how we can get in where we fit in.
I agree. Oh my gosh, LT, I feel like I keep talking to you for like hours. Which I love. I so appreciate you coming on today. I think this is a good point where we can wrap up, but I do like to wrap up with like, what is your like one, and you've dropped so many good little gems for people, but like, what is your one sort of tip for people that you want them to take away from this on how to engage with equity work if they're not sure what to do?
I live by this in like every area of my life, and I think it applies. It's a game of not quitting. I think that no matter like what it is, for me, there's no such thing as like a final no. There's always a way, and it may not look the way you thought it was going to look, and it may not be supported by who you thought it was going to support, and it might not even have the outcome that you thought it was going to have. But if you keep trying and you keep doing what you can, you will see that positive outcome, or you will get closer to achieving this goal, or you may recognize a goal that you didn't even know. And so in everything that I do, whether it's with Outlast, whether it was a film, whether it was like going to school myself, it's a game of not quitting. And I tell my students that, it might, today might suck. It might not be fun. Maybe you didn't master the thing you wanted to master. Maybe you just didn't have a good day. Get up and try again. It's a game of not quitting. And I think that's it. It's a game of not quitting.
Awesome. Oh, I love that. And I agree 100%. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for another episode of the Equity Hour. LT, it has been such a pleasure. And if you are looking to support Outlast and her nonprofit, go to the link in the show notes so we can keep doing all the great things. Thank you so much for joining us. This wraps up another episode of the Equity Hour podcast with me, your host, Dr. Tami Dean. Make sure to check out the show notes for any resources, links, and next steps from today's episode. Head on over to Instagram and give us a follow at Dragonfly Rising LLC for more tips, resources, and opportunities to connect. Thank you so much for joining us. And remember, intent is not enough. Action is necessary. How will you use your voice today?